Fans, it's James. I'm James Vowles, the Chief Strategist for the team, and I'm here to answer your questions about the Australian Grand Prix. In order to explain why we stopped Lewis where we did in the race, let's use what we call the race planner. This is a plot that tries to give a good overview of the race. Along the x-axis represents the laps of the race, from left to right as increasing lap number. On the y-axis represents the gaps between the cars in seconds. The further up the plot you are, the further up the top of the plot you are, the further ahead on the road you are relative to cars behind. So on this you can see Valtteri right at the top of it, and behind that Grosjean as one of the last lines that we've shown. And what we're looking for here is where cars have stopped in the race and why they stopped in the race. So every now and again you'll see a sharp line downwards. That represents a pit stop. That represents a car coming through the pit lane, which in Melbourne is around about 20 seconds just over. When we look at Vettel's race, he had Verstappen right behind him, around 1.6 seconds behind for all of that first stint. And I'm sure they were looking for the first opportunity to cover a potential undercut from Verstappen. And they made the decision around about lap 14 to do that. You can see that behind there's Grosjean, that sort of brown coloured line. But Grosjean came in on that lap and it put Vettel in free air. And Vettel was very, very fast. They successfully covered any undercut risk against Verstappen, but also were starting to come into Lewis's window very, very quickly. Indeed, his outlap was quite a bit faster than Lewis already, and that medium compound had a warm-up slope. What that means is it's quite difficult for the first few sequence of corners, but as you go certainly into the second lap where you're driving it, it becomes faster and faster. So there was a severe and genuine risk that in a few laps, or certainly in a lap, Vettel would be in Lewis's window. We opted to make sure we covered that off by stopping Lewis and give him enough time on track to deal with the warm-up and understand what he could do in terms of management to absorb that gap to Vettel. As you go forward in the race, you'll see later on in the race, Sebastian dropping off quite dramatically relative to the other cars in front of him. That's tyre degradation, and this plot very clearly shows you how he falls away from the front of the field. And that's why these plots are very, very useful to give you a very quick overview of the race. On inspection of Lewis's car after the race, we noticed some damage over what we call a tyre seal area. If you look at this image, you'll see the broken carbon just in front of that rear tyre on that floor region. That area is quite sensitive aerodynamically. It's both for downforce and also for balance of the car. And we believe we sustained it during the course of the race while riding over some of the curbs. Lewis already had a very long stint on that medium tyre after covering off the threat from Vettel's undercut. So he was already having to manage those tyres quite significantly, hindering his progress through the race, and really had to look after that. But furthermore, that floor damage wouldn't have helped. It would have caused the rear to be more unstable than it normally would be, and he did a fantastic job bringing that car to the end of the race. We've had a question to find out what did Valtteri have in his porridge in the morning. I don't personally know, I didn't have porridge that morning, but what I can tell you is this: Valtteri was on it all weekend. You would have seen in qualifying, he was there in contention for pole position, and it was Lewis's fantastic last lap that really put him ahead. Come the race, again, his start was perfect. He was able to take the lead of the race, and from then, he just lap after lap just pulled a small margin relative to the others behind. His race became easier at the point where Lewis had to cover the risk of undercut from Vettel, and from then onwards he had a few seconds of margin relative to both of those cars behind, where he was able to use the remainder of that soft tyre and build an 8-lap differential on tyres. That 8-lap differential was quite significant. It allowed him to then manage the tyres less to the end of the race and just keep building that gap relative to the cars behind. He did a fantastic job. He brought the car home, and at the end of the race you would have seen he had enough tyre performance left to also do the fastest lap. For 2019, you're now awarded a point for the fastest lap of the race if you're within the top 10. This was one of the hotly debated subjects within the team all the way up until Sunday morning, trying to forge the right plan of risk versus reward. The facts are there's 21 races, 21 points, which is nearly a race win's worth, and you can't let your rivals run away with that. This could be a close-fought season, and that may make all the difference. But it's risk versus reward. If, for example, you decide to do an extra pit stop for the sole purpose of being able to get the fastest lap of the race, there is risk involved in that. Perhaps you don't get a wheel connected to the car correctly and the car goes out and it's a DNF. Perhaps the driver accidentally crosses the white line on entry or exit. Either one of those has huge repercussions, and all of a sudden your race win's worth of points is meaningless relative to the one that you were going for. The converse is, again, at the end of the race, asking a driver to push and extract performance for the fastest lap of the race isn't without risk. They can go off the track, they can make a mistake, and they can risk the car. On this plot, what you'll see is across the race, all of the lap times are just getting faster and faster. The reason why is as the fuel mass comes off the car, that's a more important effect than the tyre degradation. So less fuel in the car, less weight, faster the car goes. So what it's really showing you is the fastest lap of the race is going to be set in the dying stages of the race, the last few laps when the car's at its lightest. Both Valtteri and Lewis did a great job managing the tyres and just trying to keep as much rubber available on them as they could, such that they could go for the fastest lap at the end of the race. Valtteri ultimately had tyres in a slightly better condition and didn't have the floor damage that Lewis did, and did a fantastic job scoring the maximum number of points available to him that race. Thank you very much for all of your questions. I've enjoyed answering them. Please send all your questions in for the Bahrain Grand Prix, which will be the next race debrief that we do for you.